Hey, welcome back, everybody, to the Benos podcast. And today's episode features none other than the one and only coach, David Blatt. David and me talked today a lot about his background in terms of sliding door moments. We talked about cultural experiences that he had coaching in different countries. We talked about the expectation from his staff, especially when working with Coach Kemzura and how he went about hiring him, which was a very interesting story, especially for the Lithuanian audience. We talked about philosophy, obviously also about communication, communication with players, communication within the staff, arguing, resolving conflict, all sorts of things. This podcast episode is one of the richest ones in terms of content that I've had to experience to record so far. So please enjoy this one. Please subscribe to this channel. Please share this episode. There's a lot of knowledge, not only for coaches, but also probably for players, for front office personnel. Lots of goodies in this one. Please like this episode if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you soon on the next one. Thanks for being here. Bye. We are recording. All right, David. Thank you for coming on. Thanks for being a part of my podcast.
Pleasure. Great to be with you guys.
First things first. Please tell everybody how you're doing. I know you're currently back in the States, but how is your health? How's everything holding up right now?
Day by day, head still above water. Dealing with this particular condition is not always easy. It's challenging, and it's something you got to face head on. But I'm not alone in this world with an issue that causes a different type of lifestyle and preparation, but I'm doing the best I can with it, and all is good. Thank you.
Okay, allow me to ask, how are you raising awareness for multiple sclerosis? What are some things that you're doing to just raise awareness in the public eye?
Well, I do a lot of speaking on the subject in many different places and different environments. Obviously, the mere fact that I, as a public figure, came out and announced my condition to everyone, and spoke to the subject as often and as passionately as I could and as I can. That helps to raise awareness of this particular disease. I'm always available to both people and to groups who want for me to speak on the subject or to share my story with them. And I'm certainly not lacking in making mention of the need for continued research and continued efforts to find a cure for this particular condition.
I remember we talked a little bit about it in the past, and what was the first moment where you thought and noticed there was something different, there was something was off, and something that you kind of, maybe it helps other, like it triggered a question internally about it?
Well, as a former professional player before I went into coaching, like many athletes, I experienced some back pain, which over the years became more and more acute, and actually brought me to the point where after several MRIs, I was suggested by my doctors to go through some surgical procedure that would hopefully address the type of symptoms that I was having due to my back issues, which ultimately I did do because I was experiencing great problems with leg weakness and strength and things of those natures. And I did actually do a very serious back surgery in the hope of solving that problem. But after a 6 to 8 month period of very serious rehabilitation, I found that I wasn't getting any better, and I was still experiencing the symptoms of leg weakness and balance issues. And ultimately, I went through a different type of testing through neurological doctors and found that my problem, although probably very much existed in terms of my spinal issues, it wasn't exactly what was causing me the very problems that I had been experiencing. And once it was diagnosed with MS, then the whole process took on a different light.
Mm-hmm. But despite all that, you're still active in the basketball community as well. And maybe you can shed a little bit of light on your current role with Maccabi as well as the Canadian national team, because you have duplicate roles, sort of. I mean, I'm sort of also in the two different worlds and experiencing that as well. But maybe you can shed a little bit of a light on how they differentiate and what your roles exactly are.
Well, there's a great story that I tell about, because I myself have gone from being a professional player to being a professional coach, now being a professional consultant. So that's sort of how it works. Those that can't play, coach, and those that can't coach, consult. So that's that's where I'm at right now. But I'm awfully happy and honored to be working for two such great organizations like the Canadian national team program, as well as my former team, Maccabi TelAviv, and being able to, in both cases, work together with managements and staffs as far as helping to enrich their programs in any way that I can, in any way that is acceptable to them. Obviously, I have a lot of experience both in the world of professional sport as well as in the environment of national teams. And I try to take it on myself to share knowledge and to share experience and to share processes and ideas of how to improve the programs. In neither case am I in charge. On the other hand, I certainly have the ability to impact positively on the different members of the organization, and certainly hope in my way to help them to move forward and to reach their goals and to improve.
Yeah, I guess the most important part is to impact somehow, right? Like to have impact, to give purpose, gives yourself a little bit more of a purpose, and you have the ability to impact, ability to change something, and ability to win still matters. Like we're naturally all competitors who are in this business, and you still want to have this feeling of competing, winning, going through a loss, learning, and then that's when I feel like that you probably can contribute the most to like give the teams a little bit more of a perspective on how to do things differently, how to see things from a different light. And I think that's when you can enrich these two clubs and franchises, teams in different ways, national team as well as club team. There's so many different aspects to it.
Well, listen, I feel good about being able to contribute. I hope that the people that I'm contributing to feel better about the fact that they can gain something from what I have to offer. That's the most important thing to me. I really want to see my people do well. And much like a coach, I think the greatest sense of fulfillment that you can have is seeing your players do well and seeing them succeed in their current environments, whether it's your team or whether it's going forward with their career in terms of advancing both their own career, but advancing in their own lives, becoming more and more successful in ways on and off the court. So, in that respect, although I'm not coaching and don't pretend to be, I hope that I can help those coaches and those players and those staff members that can gain something from what it is that I can give, and if so, I couldn't be happier.
Well, listen, let's talk about all those little parts, because in my podcast I prepare usually 4 quarters for all the head coaches, and I've prepared 4 quarters for you. But also, as I tell all the high profile coaches who come on and visit, to let's agree to let the accomplishments rest in peace for today, and they're just going to be shoved to the side for a little moment, and we're going to talk about the nuances that got you there to get to those accomplishments, and maybe help to gain perspectives to the listeners and to gain a little bit of different type of knowledge. So I prepared 4 quarters. The background part is not the traditional background part as I usually ask, but I will ask specific questions that may trigger a little bit of a different thought process. Then we're going to go into coaching, prep work, and scouting around the team. The third quarter will be just a short one about game decisions, just in-game, not strategic, but tactical, as well as some do's and don'ts that you probably see and have better experience with. And the fourth quarter is my favorite one in this case, because it's philosophical and communication. That's what I love to talk about, and that's what we're gonna. That's probably gonna be the meat of our conversation. But before we get there, the background part is, to me, always. I'm always curious if there was a sliding door moment in your career where your career could have turned a completely different way. That some moment that sticks out in your past, whether it's before you started coaching professionally, that maybe you could have turned in a completely different direction, or a career break, let's say, where it just took off from there and it could have went either way.
Well, I mean, there were several moments like that, to be honest with you. First, my decision to go overseas and play professionally after I graduated from Princeton was a sliding door moment. You know, I really had a serious decision to make, whether to go into the study of law or into the world of business right away after graduating college. And I decided that I wanted to continue to play basketball for a short period of time, just to have the experience and to continue in the game that I loved. I did go overseas and played. Actually, after 3 years, I came back to the United States and went to work for Xerox Corporation in the United States, because I felt like, okay, I've done this and I've enjoyed it, but maybe I need to get a little more serious about my life and do what the typical college graduate does after finishing. After 2 years of working, still playing on a daily basis, on a nightly basis, on all the local leagues, I realized that, hey, you know what? This is what I really want to do. Why am I not playing until the wheels fall off? And I went back overseas and played another 9 years professionally in Israel. And then another sliding door moment happened. I was about ready to turn 34, and I was in the pro ranks, and I tore my Achilles tendon. And that ended my career. It was a complete rupture, and I was getting later on in my career anyway. I always laughed to myself thinking about the irony of my favorite book of all time, the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, and of course Achilles, the protagonist, the main hero. He lost his life via an arrow to the Achilles, which I found to be ironic on a number of different levels. Not that I was a superhero or anything like that, but indeed something happened that he had been more or less protected with a blessed life, and the only place of weakness that forced the change was, of course, that one area where his mother had held him by the heel and dipped him in the water, allowing him to be godlike. And that was his vulnerable area. Now, I was anything but godlike, but I certainly found my career ended by such an injury, and that forced me to think about what I was going to do with the rest of my life. Now, for coaches, I can tell you, while I was playing, every year, I always asked my club to allow me to coach a youth team for a couple of reasons. Number one, I had time. I was a professional player. I had a lot of time on my hand, and I wanted to use that time in some productive manner, and I really enjoyed working with young people. So every year that I played, I also coached a youth team. At that point, I still had not had it in my mind to continue with with that as the rest of my life career. But in a way, without knowing, I was preparing myself for that. And when that injury happened and I received the opportunity on the part of Gilles Lyon, where I had been a professional player, to come and to be an assistant after my injury, I thought to myself, why not? You know, I was doing it anyway with younger teams, and let me give it a try and see how it works out, how it worked out. You know, 30 years later, I can tell you it worked out pretty well for me.
Yeah, I can't complain about that one. That's a pretty, I don't want to say like parallels to you and me, but that's something I felt as well, that I had injuries in college that they took a toll on me when I was professional. But it took a toll on me, I started to coach as well on the side with kids. And it felt I could impact in a different way. On the court, you impact one way as a player. And then off the court, it was as coaching youth, it's kind of like a mentorship role, and you feel like you can really change kids because majority of those kids will not be able to play professionally. So you kind of feel like you can give them some kind of guidance and implement some sort of values into them. And I thought that was very rewarding. And you know, in hindsight, it also prepared me to kind of get my thoughts out there a little bit better, to make me think of what kids go through, what I went through, and how you can impact them going on. And I think that helped me also further on to connect with people on different levels, you know, because kids are have one way of thinking, and you can change their thought process a little bit.
No doubt, no doubt.
I have one strange question in terms of the background that's not everybody's cup of tea, let's say, because it's a Tim Ferriss question. He's one of my favorite podcasters, and he's always asked his guests, is there a favorite failure, if you look back, that you like? You know, favorite failure is it's counterintuitive, but it's something that maybe you look back on, and of course it was a little bit of a bitter taste that left, but that taught you so much going forward, and that you look back on, that you can reflect on and say, man, that failure made me a better coach. You know, is there something in the background that you feel like jumps out at you right away?
That's really a good question. What comes to my mind are a couple of things, because it's not only one thing. If you've only experienced one favorite failure, you're either being dishonest, or you're being unrealistic, or you haven't done anything. Because if you haven't done anything, you're not going to fail. But if you've tried to do a lot, then most likely you failed a number of times, and that's a good thing, if you ask me. You know, when I think back on my long career, like most coaches, you're not going to make it through a career without getting fired a few times, without losing your job, or without having to leave a job due to unhappiness or some unpleasant aspect of the place. So, I mean, there's been 3 occasions in my career where I've lost my job or had to leave a job due to financial problems of the team, or due to unsavory behavior of some of the people around the team, as well as, instances where the managers just didn't see me as being the right guy for whatever reason, or some people impacting on your ability to do your job in such a way that you became not the choice person for that situation. So I think the 3 times that I lost my job during the course of my career really, really helped me, because they forced me to be introspective. They forced me to evaluate myself, and to really make an effort to improve in many different aspects of the profession. And I'm thankful for that. It's not always pleasant to think about it, and it's not always the desirable thing. But there's no shame in falling down. But it's shameful not to get up again once you've fallen. And I can tell you that as someone who's had those experiences, I tried, and I believe that they made me better. So you know, looking back, it's all in how you manage it, and all in how you learn from it, and all in how you allow that to motivate you in such a way as to move forward and to get better.
So, and during those, let's call it ups and downs, just to be as simple as possible. And was there a time or a place or a team, a certain year where of realization? Because I've had a realization in the past where, you know, you go from one level to another, and then you just have like an epiphany where it's just like, oh, this is a different level basketball, different kind of basketball. Is that like lessons left and right that I have absorbed, and that kind of opened my mind to of like the possibilities of how basketball can be played, of how basketball evolves in a different way. There's not one way of doing things. Was there a moment or a time, or maybe a country for that matter, that opened up your eyes a little bit more, even more, just to have like a wider horizon and made you understand that there's a lot more that you didn't know up until that point?
Well, you know, the great John Wooden, you know, the historical and perhaps the most famous college basketball coach in the history of American sports, head coach of UCLA, of course. You know, he once said, it's what you learn after you know everything that counts. And I've tried to adopt that throughout the course of my career. And every place that I've gone, and every team that I've coached, and every management that I've worked with, and every staff that I've either hired or become part of, they all have different ideas. They all have different ways of doing things. And I think it's so important, as someone like me who's worked in many different countries, in many different environments, that you recognize the critical nature of cultural competency, being able to know where you're coming from and to bring that to the table, but also being open-minded enough to understand where you are coming to or where you are going to, and accepting that there are differences and that there are different ways of doing things. And there is the importance to be open-minded and to being tolerant of those things. Not to think that you have your way and that's the only way. It doesn't generally get you very far. So I always try to make it a point to understand the environment that I was in, to learn some of the language of the place that I was living in, to embrace the cultural differences of those places, to recognize the different personalities that perhaps already were in place when I arrived there, and to make that work in such a fashion that I would grow as a person. I would help those people or those individuals that I was working with to grow also, and to make that a point of emphasis, you know, whether it be through communication, whether it be through just understanding, whether it be through a sincere desire to recognize one another, accept one another, be patient with one another on a level that went beyond whether, you know, you feed the post more in this place or you shoot the ball with this particular technique and that pace. That stuff is secondary. And I think that was probably one of the very biggest keys to my coaching success and coaching career in different.
Yes, adaptability and embracing was the word that I think that I also was thinking of. And I had this topic later on in communication, but let's talk about that a little bit, because there's one thing that I wanted to add from my side, because I know that once you learn also more languages, speaking the tongue of a different culture makes you think a different way as well. It helps you. It rewires your brain. I don't know the anatomical or the biological, you know, like significance of it, but it rewires your brain in certain ways, and it helps you to think and understand people in a different way, in a different light. And there's, like you said, there's not one way of doing things. You have to have these, pick up certain things from them by learning their language, by learning how they think. Because when you start expressing, you start learning and listening of what they say, how they say it, it triggers a different aha moment in you where you're like, oh, okay, that's where he's coming from, coming from in regards of like thought process. But in those situations when you were in in all this, I mean, I was looking at the countries, US, Turkey, Russia, Greece, Italy. Am I missing something?
USA, Canada.
Yeah, USA, Canada. Yeah.
Did you say Israel?
Yeah, Israel, of course, yes. Yeah, that's an obvious aha moment there. Let's call it brain fart. But what cultural cues did you specifically look for in those countries that you coached, that maybe by learning the language or by embracing certain things, were there certain cues that stood out to you the most, whether it was body language, whether it was intonation of a certain sentence structure that kind of helped you understand them a little bit better?
Sure. I mean, many, almost too many to mention. I'll give you some small examples in Israel. For example, you have to understand that there are many holidays there, some which are more of a serious nature, some which are more of a celebratory nature. You have to be willing and ready to adapt your practice schedule, even your game schedule, certainly your load schedule, according to those holidays. Very much the same thing in Turkey. There are periods of time where certain players may be fasting throughout the course of the day and eat only at night. And you better be aware of that in order to set up your practice schedule and your load schedule in such a way that allows these guys to make it through that period of time. Certainly, Russia, from a linguistic standpoint, was very challenging. But it's not only the language that's different; it's also the mentality that is so very different. And you have to recognize that and be respectful of that in such a way that allows you to communicate with people effectively and efficiently and in the proper manner. So, when I come into the NBA, it was a whole different world. I'm American born, but I spent most of my time in Europe. When I came back after 36 years to the United States, it was a whole different world for me. It was my native tongue, and these were people that I had grown up with. But the world of basketball in the United States, and certainly in the NBA, had changed drastically for all of us. The world has changed drastically. Yes. The internet and the media and the all of the different influences and influencers, they've changed the nature of sport in general. And you, working with younger people who are maybe a lot more part of that world than you yourself are, have to be aware of that, have to understand the impact of those things, have to be cognizant of what motivates these guys, have to be aware of outside influences that may impact your team or your players or your interpersonal relationships. These are things that demand a kind of again, cultural competency or a kind of maturity or a kind of tolerance that really challenges you in terms of leading your people.
Yeah, the communication part, I think, changed the most over the course of a year. Like this, the way people communicate, the way they express themselves, the way they also receive communication. There's a different way of. There's on many podcasts they talk about it, of how, if you look at the world from, let's say 1750 to 1850, 100-year span, or 1900, there's not much change happening, right? There's it's a minor change here and there. Everybody lived more or less in the same manner. If you fast forward, to now, and you compare, just think of how it was 10 years ago, and how it is now, it's a completely different sphere, and the things are changing as we speak, and the way media is digested these days, it's such a quick turnaround that whatever somebody said a week ago is not interesting anymore.
100% right. It's a different world we live in, and unfortunately, not necessarily a better one, but in some ways better.
There's always pluses and minuses to everything. Obviously, so there's some good that comes with the bad always.
Absolutely.
But if you jump back on the coaching part and you envisioned yourself in while becoming a coach, did you have a vision of how you wanted to become, what kind of coach you wanted to become? Because when guys start coaching, they have a lot of times of a way of presenting how they want to present themselves and how they really want to be perceived versus of what kind of coach you became. Was there a difference? Is that what I'm trying to say? Is that does it matter of visualizing yourself of how you want to look, or do you just going to go with the flow and become who you can and are meant to become as a coach?
Yeah, I think it does. I think it does make a difference. I think it's also very important. When I lecture to coaches or players or even businesses, I talk a lot about what are the pillars of your profession, and in coaching, for me, there's 4 or 5 pillars that are particularly critical. But I'll start with this, the philosophy in coaching, I think, has two kind of sides, or has two particular ideologies, so to speak. Some coaches are system coaches, okay, and they have their way of playing and their way of doing things, and no matter where they go, that's how they're going to play. I myself, in college, I played for a system coach, famous Hall of Fame coach Pete Carril, who developed the Princeton offense, and that's something that he took with him throughout his whole career. He played that way. He taught those things, and that was it. And that's fine, by the way. When I came to Europe, which was a totally different environment to play, nobody was playing the Princeton offense, so you had to learn to play a different way, which wasn't easy, by the way. And then ultimately, I went into coaching. I recognized that for me to be successful, I had to be part of another school. I wanted to be a personnel coach, someone that coached to the particular skill set of the players that he was working with. And it could be different, from year to year, or from roster to roster. Now, one of the most important things I'm going to tell you about coaching is that nobody's 100% right. This isn't more right than that. It's really about what you believe and what you work and the way that you work. So while I sort of became a personnel coach, much more than a system coach, there's always certain principles that you take with you no matter where you go. But there are more things along the line of doing things right, doing things consistently, doing things with the purpose, doing things with the caring about the people that you're working with. That goes beyond just did you get your shots up for today, or it has to do with their lives and has to do that with them as human beings. Because one of the ultimate pillars of my coaching philosophy, of course, is be a human being. You got to recognize that you're working with people, and that you can't necessarily look at everybody the same. You can have rules and standards for the group, but not everybody necessarily can be treated in exactly the same way, or can be understood in the same way, or can be critiqued, or can be coached in the same way. Sometimes you got to recognize that you're dealing with different people and make it work for them as well as it works for you. So certainly there's an awful lot to that.
I completely get and I understand what's the crass difference between a system coach and the personnel coach. Like, to me, the personnel coach is more artistic. It's more of adjusting and seeing, feeling. It's more like having empathy for the player of who he is, who he wants to be. Sometimes the vision of the player doesn't match of who he really wants to be, like, or who he really is. And I mean, but you can't judge the coaches who are system coaches, right? I mean, they're gonna live and die with their system, and for good or bad. But I feel like there's always some kind of forcing going on, when you're a system coach, because there's a lot of times you inherit a roster and you can't completely play the same plays, the same playbook with every player, from team to team. So I feel like there has to be more adjusting with the system coach than there has to be with the personnel coach, because it's just too much of a cage that you bring into a roster, and you put them in certain situations where they don't feel comfortable at, I feel.
Well, again, and I don't want to correct you, but I think perhaps you mixed up the two in terms of what I mean. A system coach by nature is going to be a little bit more rigid and disciplined according to how he or she wants to do things. But I don't think there's a negative to either one. I certainly would not find any problem with someone who is a system coach, more so that I was. I think another of the pillars that I really believe in terms of the importance of coaching is that you have to have a philosophy. You have to have your way of doing things that you believe in. And together with that, you have to be a teacher. You have to be able to teach those things. So if your efficiency or effectiveness as a coach comes from you having a system that you believe in, that you understand, that you know top to bottom, well, then fine. That's the way you should do it, because that's what works for you. And maybe it's in many cases, it has a lot to do with where you're working and how long you're going to be there. You know what I mean? Or how long you want to stay there. Generally the continuity that's necessary to implement a particular system where you have to change the way that certain guys play is going to mean you're going to need more time. If you want to adjust quickly, or if you're stepping into different environments and different cultures, perhaps you have to be a little bit more flexible, because you may not be coming into a place that you know everybody that well, or that you're making your own choices in terms of the roster. So it could be the necessity is the mother of invention. You got to make it work, so you figure out what and how you want to do things.
So, but like in either system, if we take both pillars, the one thing the pet peeve that I have with either, because there's sometimes coaches in both categories, and I invented a new term here. Are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
It's called over basketballing. So there's to me, there has to be a balance between sophistication and simplicity, right? So there's a lot of coaches that are over basketballing, and therefore forcing the issue in a lot of regards, whether it's one or the other, right? So do you think that there's a perfect balance between simplicity and sophistication, or is that something that I just kind of fantasize about?
No, I don't think that's oversimplifying. I just think, in many cases, in a coaching career, for example, unless you're lucky enough to be in the same place for a long period of time, you're almost forced to adjust, adapt, and to be more flexible in terms of how you're going to do things. And just, you got to be realistic about that. If not, and you recognize, hey, this is the only way that I can do this well, then you better find a situation that allows for that gives you the chance to stay there and to develop a program in a way that you want to develop it only, and to have the continuity that you need in order to go long term with something. And a lot of it depends on where you're at in your career and what you want to do in your career. But again, I mean, for system coaches and for personnel coaches, there in most cases, many principles that they hold true to regardless. It just may not be how do you establish your position in the post, or how do you play pick and roll defense, or or how do you create ball movement. These things can be done in different ways, whether systematically or whether they're personnel driven. But in terms of coming to work every day and being who and what you need to be in order to help the team, in terms of your practice and your preparation and things of those natures, those are things you can always take with you. Those are principles that you have to have, I think, regardless of what system or what philosophy of coaching that you have.
Okay, so let's talk about the preparation part a little bit in terms of staff. So we have a common thread now, and Coach Kemzura was a longtime assistant for you, and I'll have the pleasure to work with him for the first time in this FIBA window. And I was wondering, from your perspective towards the vision of an assistant coach, what's your expectation from your assistant coach, whether it's in game or in practice? What kind of roles do you want them to carry, whether it's personal relationships or tactics, or certain balance that they should give to you in terms of, when you're loud, you want them to be quiet. If you're quiet, you want them to be loud. Is there certain balance you expect from them? And are there certain no-nos that you see that assistant coaches should stay away from?
Well, as a coach, first of all, I can tell you that the greatest part of my success came from the fact that I worked with great staffs. I'll give you a short story and a quick example of that. But I'll start with, I know that I personally am not great at many things, but one thing I do think that I am great at, I think I'm a great judge of character. So any of the choices that I made, I always tried to make them based on character first, whether it was players, whether it was coaches, whether it was staff. So I'll tell you this story. When the first time that I left Israel as a coach was to go to St. Petersburg in Russia, and when I was beginning to build my staff, my GM, a guy by the name of Igor Rubin, he suggested to me, he said, "Hey, I'm not going to tell you who you should take on your staff, but I suggest that you talk to this young man." I said, "Sure, what's his name?" He said, "His name's Kemzura." He said, I just think because he, although he's Lithuanian, he speaks perfect Russian, and he also speaks English. And for you, that could be a big advantage to have someone that comes in and speaks the language and speaks your language and may help with the whole process of adjusting to a new home and a new way of life." So I said, "Sure, give me his number." And I called him on the telephone, and we began the conversation, and 5 minutes on the clock went by. And I said, "Cassis, you know what? I don't want to talk to you anymore. I've already heard all I need to know. Call me back in 24 hours if you want the job or not." 5-minute conversation. Fortunately, 24 hours later, he called me back and he said, let's do this thing. Let's try. This was a very, very unknown project for the both of us. That had a very happy end, by the way. But it's moments like that you recognize how important your partners are, your staff is, and your assistants are. I hate even to call them assistants. I call them associates. And I think the thing you got to recognize, and the thing that you want, is to set the proper expectations for them by telling them what it is that you need and that you want, and not just leaving it up in the air and saying, "Okay, however you do, we'll see." And at the same time, allowing them to embrace their position and to contribute in any way, shape, or form that they feel is positive and is helpful within the expectations that you've set. That if a game is going on and you have to make a decision, you don't want your assistant getting up and making the decision for you. That should be one of the expectations. You certainly don't want to coach an assistant who's going to be disloyal in any way, shape, or form. You don't want an assistant who's not going to be on time, who's not going to work hard, who's not going to do everything and anything that you ask of them within reason, of course. Knowing that you yourself, and I was an assistant myself, would be willing to do the same thing. And I never ask an assistant to do something that you yourself wouldn't be willing to do if you were an assistant or when you were an assistant. But at the same time, set the bar high and expect them to live up to your needs. But again, just like with players, be a human being. Understand that they're also a human being, that they have a desire to feel wanted, to feel valued, to feel respected, to feel that they have what to contribute in a major fashion. And those things being said, the likelihood of you being successful with your assistants is very high.
Being valued, I think, is the key word. That they have like contributing factors, having purpose within the staff, and feeling like you have a voice. I think that's one of the key things for assistant scouts on the staff, that they all feel like they are contributing to the bigger picture. No question.
I've said this before on many occasions, and I'm happy to say it again. One of my best experiences. I worked from some really good coaches. I worked for Penny Gershon, the great European. I coached for assistant coach for Multiple with the Israeli national team. By the way, I actually played for both of those guys too in my career. I worked with Arik Shibak, another very good Israeli coach, and all of them contributed to me. If I speak specifically about Penny, for example, people know the many great teams that we had together. And I think one of the biggest boons to my career was the fact that he gave me the opportunity to be so impactful and influential in the program. And he didn't have to do that. He did it wholeheartedly, and he did it understanding the fact that would help our team. And I'm thankful to him for that to this day. And not all coaches are like that. A lot of coaches, they lack the confidence to allow their assistants to be frontal, or to be impactful and to have a say in things. And I think that speaks more to the confidence of the coach than it does to the ability of the assistant. If the coach is confident and knows he's got a good person working for him, who does check the other boxes of loyalty and of hard work and of discipline and of going the extra meter or yard to make things work for the team, then you've got something there.
The head coach has to feel secure. I think it's about having feeling secure, that you empower your assistant coaches to have a voice and to impact and not feel threatened, for example. What made you, a follow-up question on that, what made you a good judge of character? Was there a certain, or was that something that came as a natural gift?
Well, my father, God rest his soul, always taught me as a little kid, look people straight in the eye, never speak to anybody from above, and never look at anybody from below. Try to recognize that people deserve respect, that give you respect, and the opposite is true always. And I think that helped me to recognize the importance of character in anything, because you really can't go too far, too long working with people that are of bad character. Most of us were fortunate enough to have a parent or two parents that taught us the right way. And I'm older now and I have 4 children, and I know that what I knew then, even raising them, and I don't know now, but certainly what I knew then was a little bit more than what they did at the time. And passing on valuable life lessons to my children, to my players, has always been tantamount. It's always been something that's important. And then ultimately, of course, letting them make their own decisions. But, if you've been fortunate enough to have good mentors or good teachers or good coaches, then probably you're going to end up with being a pretty good judge of character.
I think having the right moral compass comes to mind to know, understand, and feel right from wrong, and then you kind of you get a sense for who the other person is. One last question about the basketball, the coaching and the preparation part would be in regards to video scouting or preparation to before you go into a game in terms of preparing the team with scouting reports, with video analysis. Is there also a way of over basketballing things over? Like, how do you eliminate information overload? Or were you a coach that wanted to have the players as much information as possible and for them to make the right decision? Or did you filter it down in terms of being digestible and easier implementing and letting them play and not overload them with too much information?
Well, this brings us back to where we were talking about the way that the world has changed. And if you look at my career and my way of doing things in terms of video and video preparation and scout preparation, whether it be written reports or whether it be meetings or things like that, I can tell you that today I would be viewed definitely as an overcoaching guy. That's because the world has changed. Today people sit on their iPhone and they watch something for a minute or two, and then they change their iPhone, not even their TV, to another channel so they can watch something else. That's why the world of sports viewing is going through, such great throes of change, in terms of how they even are able to hold viewers,
Attention.
So it's the same thing with being able to hold the attention of your players. I think you got to do things in a shorter and in a more concise fashion, because people's attention span isn't what it used to be, unfortunately. It's not necessarily a bad thing. Change is not always bad by any stretch of the imagination. But you just have to learn how to do it differently and do it in a way that is efficient and interesting and palatable, something that people can be with in a good way, but it's very different than it once was. And perhaps my way of doing things then is something that wouldn't even work now.
I've read somewhere, and double check me if I'm right or wrong, somewhere here in the internet, whoever's listening, that there's the attention span of humans has shrunk to that of a goldfish, and it's right about like a 7-8 second attention span. And it's got to do with social media, obviously, because social media, all the reels, the TikTok videos, they're all around that same length, and people lose interest. They just go scrolling through the next thing, and it's got to do with dopamine hits and everything. But I don't want to get into that. But it's something that programs the people in a certain way, and it's automatically, obviously, the new generation growing up. To read a scout report that's 2-3 pages long, it's probably close to impossible unless you're a really dedicated book reader.
I will say this: the world of sport is one of the last bastions. World of sport and preparation is one of the last bastions of discipline, and I hope it stays as long as possible. It's not what it was, but the process-oriented nature of preparation, whether it be physical, whether it be tactical, whether it be mental, emotional, psychological, it very much exists in sport, and that's a good thing. That's one of the great values of kids still being able to go to a practice, to being coached, to being asked to follow preparation reports or scouting or video. In some ways it forces them to stay a little bit more focused, a little bit longer, in a disciplined and in a healthy way that will indeed influence the rest of their lives. So that's a good thing.
All right, Dave, are you ready? Are you ready for the third quarter? We're going to go into the...
I always like the third quarter because you've gone through a half, You've been able to go into halftime, make a couple of quick adjustments, because you can't change the whole landscape, but you recognize certain things. And I always felt I was a better coach in the second half than I was in the first. So yeah, let's do it. I'm ready.
All right. We're gonna go through all those little things that also that matter in the second half, the little adjustments. But the third quarter, ironically, has more to do with something, the first part anyway, of your game day routine, or something you do before the first quarter, obviously. But how did you approach game day when you come into because there's a certain tone that you set when you walk into the gym, shoot around. The players have to feel it. It's today's game day. There's some certain seriousness that everybody brings to the table, and it's necessary, obviously. But in terms of your preparation work on the game day, when you wake up, are you visualizing certain place you're going to run? Are you going to come in, do the shoot around a certain way, and then between shoot around and the game itself, there's certain things that you did, or were you just loose and took a nap and that's it? How did you approach the game?
Well, that's not necessarily third quarter. That's before the third quarter.
Yeah.
And pardon my coaching critique, but I kind of always listen exactly to what I'm being told and then try to follow that. So you changed it up on me, but that's okay. I got to adapt. I was pretty structured in terms of approaching game day. Now, of course, you're going to be challenged by different start times of the game. You're going to be challenged by the number of days or practices that you may have before the game. You're going to be challenged by, things such as injuries or sickness or fatigue issues. So, you got to take all those things into consideration. I tried to be very consistent on game day. If it was a normal start time, whether start with a video session and a shoot around, and then the opportunity to let the players go home and rest and then come back to a game in the evening if it was that kind of thing. In terms of the emphasis that you placed on the other team, that had a lot to do with what your relative situation was in terms of who was the stronger team. Again, most system coaches, they're not going to really care what the other guy does. They're gonna coach to what it is that they know and believe in. And they're going to say, make them adjust to us. Other coaches, personnel coaches, may be thinking more in terms of lineups and matchups and advantages and disadvantages, whether it be shooting capability, whether it be rebounding capability, whether it be defensive capabilities. So these are things that you got to be aware of and taken into consideration once the game approaches. Getting now into the specific idea of the third quarter, these are things that you should be evaluating quickly at halftime. Get a couple of words of input from your coaches to recognize and to evaluate in your mind as you're going through the first half and as you're walking off the court. 2 or 3 or 4 things that you really have to emphasize and to recognize as being critical to second half performance. All these things are things that are happening quickly. So your ability to adjust and adapt, it doesn't just happen out of nowhere. It happens because you've been through it before, or you've experienced things before, or you've even prepared yourself for the things that you can't prepare for. You can't prepare for a guy getting injured. You know what I mean? Maybe he's your best shooter, or maybe he's your best rebounder. Does that mean I have to, play this guy? Does that mean I have to play this particular set? Does that mean if my best rebounder isn't playing anymore, that I better play a different kind of defense? Or perhaps the other team is just running you like crazy and you can't stop their fast break. Do I have to change the way I play offense in order to influence their ability to transition to the other end? Do I have to change my lineup in some way, shape, or form? Do I have to change the way or the length of the plays that I'm running? There's a lot of different things that you got to think about, but you have that in your mind already because you've already envisioned it. and it doesn't come from nowhere, but you do react to it seemingly in an intuitive fashion, even though it's not intuitive. Everything's been done before.
Yep.
You know, you have it in your brain, and you're making your adjustments based on things you've almost always already seen.
So allow me to look back on 2014, because that's something that also always is in my mind, and I want to use that as an example because that's how I saw your team. We faced each other in the semifinals of the EuroLeague Final Four, and to me, when I was scouting your team, it always felt like you had two teams in the roster. You had a post-up team with Sofo, and you had a pick and roll team with Alex Tyes. And there's two different rosters that you could put on the floor depending on the matchups or whatever you wanted to attack at that time. Were you? And it was. I mean, for Sofo, there's basically everything is basically a mismatch down low. So it's really touch and go with him. But in general, were you more based on going to your best player and letting him be the decisive factor, or were you more mismatch based and looking for where the biggest mismatch is? Did you value one over the other to an extent?
Well, that's a great example of the importance of being able to both use your way of playing and adapt to the reality of different situations. CSKA of 2014 with Coach Messina and with you and with the other great members of your staff and just a terrific roster. You guys were a stronger team than we were. And we knew we had to play differently if we wanted to have a chance to win. Specific to, Sofo and Alex, that's correct. We didn't change that. We played a certain way with the two of those players, and those ways were very different. Sofo was one of the best true target players that Europe has ever known. He was just a fantastic rim runner and low post half court player that you could play off of and read defenses according to how they react to him. But Sofo could only play effectively 15, 18 minutes a game. So we, for example, had a rule that when Sofo was in the game, every single offense, regardless, he had to touch the ball. He didn't have to shoot, but he had to touch it. That was a rule.
High volume. You go. Yeah.
He had to touch the ball so we could maximize his great performance for a certain period of time, and his performance was great. And when Alex was in the game, we could play a lot more free-flowing, open, pick-and-cut oriented, 4-out, 1-in type offense that allowed us to take advantage of his great and particular skill set. And these are the kind of things that perhaps are more personnel oriented. When you're are more personality oriented when you're coaching your specific team. But as a coach, it's your job to find out. I think maybe more than anything else, when it comes to game coaching, when it comes to second half coaching, you have to understand how to maximize your advantages and minimize your disadvantages. And if you do that, then you can change the course of a game that maybe isn't going well, or you can maintain the course of the game that is going particularly well.
Yeah, and I remember David Blumenthal was the key factor in stretching the defense out and giving all the space for the inside.
Stretch fours in Europe, and I think he's undervalued and underestimated.
Not by that was he was it. He was the X factor.
By the way, Guy Panini did that for us too. Even though he wasn't particularly big, Guy could play both 3 and the 4. If you're talking about traditional position, which no longer really exists, it's a positionless game of today, of course. But in those times, guys that could stretch the floor and could pass the ball were just invaluable. And of course, that's become the way of the NBA, which I think they took more from Europe than anything else.
Absolutely. Was there one But what did you base your end of the game lineups on? Was there one certain thing that you had to adjust, or did you always feel like playing small was the better solution, or what did you base your decision at the end of the game on?
Generally, I like to go small at the end of the game, just because particularly in closer games, you're looking at more switching defensively than you are early in the game. Even that has changed. It's become such a switch-oriented game because lineups are more equitable in terms of size and length and whatnot. But generally having a more varied defensive approach, because you have players that are more versatile in terms of guarding different positions. That was the way that normally we would want to finish the game. And again, in the case of a great post-up player like Sofo, he was only going to play a certain number of minutes anyway. So we were maximizing his minutes when he was extremely effective and efficient. And then we were going with another roster that allowed us both the energy and the flexibility on both ends of the court that we were looking for.
All right, we're going now straight into the fourth quarter, and that's going to be my my go-to my go-to communication quarter. But before we go into the communication part, there's a philosophical part in terms of changing your practice philosophy over the course of your career. Did it change over the course of the career? If it changed, how much did it change? Is something that influenced your change over the course of your career? What were the things that you felt like you internally adapted and changed the most on?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is the double practice routine. Now, I will say this: when I became a coach, particularly as I moved forward, I recognized that many teams, particularly overseas, they used to do a lot of running in the hills and running in the mountains and do a lot of pure conditioning type practices. And very quickly I recognized that was not something I wanted to do. I just felt that conditioning on the floor, whether it be with or without the ball, was a lot more appropriate. So, we could start with that. But also I came to recognize that after the preseason, practicing twice a day, both because of the schedule and because of the physical load, because just about every team that I was coaching was a higher level team that had many games and many different competitions. And I just realized that the 2 practice a day schedule wasn't really good anymore, except, if you had guys that needed to come in there twice a day to do some extra work, that's one thing. But having full practice or full tape practice or any of those things, it just wasn't appropriate. And it wasn't helpful to the players or to our long-term goals. So understanding that sometimes doing less gives you a little bit more, or at the very least engaging the players in terms of their need to come to the gym twice a day and dress and undress and shower or tape or all these other things. Sometimes one good longer practice would be better than two practices, and I think it helped the players too, both physically and mentally.
So talking about the load a little bit, there's, like you said, like regulating the load and seeing how the players are maybe getting fatigued. Maybe it's just not really, it also depends on the part of the season. But when you noticed that throughout the season of the ups and downs of your team, was there certain cues you looked for in certain periods of the season that told you that you needed to change something up, whether it was load or maybe just change the routine a little bit up?
Of course, and a lot of that comes with experience. There's some things that you can smell them. You can smell when is tired or when a particular player is overloaded. I've been fortunate to work with great physio physio staffs and with great strength and conditioning coaches who contribute immeasurably to me understanding how far and how much I should and could push. And having that faith in the good people that you bring into your organization is so important. Just because someone else tells you something that you yourself didn't think of, or even that you yourself don't necessarily believe in, it doesn't mean it's a bad thing or they're trying to impact your job negatively. It might be quite the opposite. They may really want to help you and say, hey, listen, this is the real deal. I think you need to pay attention to this. You know what I mean? And I'm thankful to this day for the great people that I work with that were behind closed doors, of course, willing to come to me and say, hey, this is not right. Or, hey, you need to do this differently. Or, hey, this is impacting us in a bad way. So that we could discuss it, so that we could argue it, so that we could agree to disagree on it. But when we came out that door from our locker room or from our coach's room, we were all on the same page, speaking the same language, sending the same message. But guys that challenged me behind closed doors, I didn't mind it at all. I liked it, actually.
You need those guys in your corner. You need those guys. You don't want yes men all the time around you, because everybody is going to be yes men down the drain, because then there's nobody saying something just to make you think differently and see it from a different light. But again, we're back to feeling secure about somebody telling you what they think, and you're not feeling offended by it, but embracing it.
Well, always remember this: if you're sitting in the room with your staff, whether it be other coaches or your physios or your strength and conditioning coach, and everybody in the room agrees on something, it probably means that you're all stupid. So you got to be open-armed about hearing different things and different ideas, and at times even being told, hey, you're not right, or I don't agree with that. All right, then you can say, tell me why, and listen to it, and maybe that's correct. So nothing wrong with that.
So, okay, so let's talk about conflict a little bit, but more maybe in regard conflict within the staff can happen internally in terms of debate. I don't think there should be any conflict, because we're talking about, we're now at the phase where we're hiring good people. So we're believe that the intent is the right one, so we believe in each other. But if there is a conflict amongst two players in the practice that you feel like you need to address, sometimes it cleans up by itself, but sometimes you need to address it. How do you address it?
Well, listen, communication and humanity and everything you do is so important in team sport, and it's so important in coaching. You got to have a sincere desire to sit people down together and to discuss things, or to get them to sit down together and discuss things, and to encourage that and to embrace that. There of course is a time and a place for everything, though, and you got to make them aware of it. Your expectation should be, hey, whatever issues you have, don't bring them on the floor with you. And if there is an issue on the floor, let's nip it in the bud very quickly and settle it outside the court. Because you're dealing with a whole team. You're not dealing just with two guys. That doesn't allow for the type of selflessness that you want to encourage in your organization and in your team. But you definitely have to address those things. You can't just push them under the rug and expect them to go away. That's not a good philosophy either. You got to get guys to sit down and talk to one another, or you got to sit down and constantly be communicating on an individual level, on a personal level, on a team level, so that that people are empathetic to one another and are aware of differences and willing to settle them in a positive way.
That's, like you said, you can't put it under the rug, because the dust will build up, and at the end the team will trip over the rug, because it just becomes too big of a hill. And there's a mentorship question I have for you, and it's a little bit of a different obviously a little bit of a different type of thought process that I wanted to get out of you. Imagine all the knowledge you have accumulated by now. Imagine everything you know, you've through an experience, but it's you at a young age being a head coach of a team at a lower level, not at the highest level, but at a lower level with the knowledge of the highest level coach. What do you apply? What do you not apply? What is not applicable?
You know, I've told you, I speak quite often to coaches, and I always say that the coaches at the younger levels, the youth levels, they're responsible for what has happened to me in my career. You know, without a doubt, if I get guys in my program that haven't been coached well in their youth, or gals that haven't been coached well in their youth, then my job is either impossible or ineffective or extremely cumbersome. So, you know, for me at the youth levels, being able to teach the love of the game, being able to teach fundamentals, being able to teach the importance of what is really important about team sport, those are invaluable lessons that are irreplaceable. And unfortunately, the later a guy goes in his basketball career or life, those are the harder things to come by in terms of being able to learn. It's just like language. You're going to learn language a lot better in your youth than you are later in your life, you know, because your brain has been blocked by knowledge that you've already acquired, and it's not open as it would be if you got those things when you were younger. So, you know, just those, you know, those basic things on the part of the younger coaches and the younger teams that are being coached, you know, are just invaluable and irreplaceable. And my appreciation and my respect for youth coaches worldwide is so great. And I know that personally, I never would have had the kind of success that I had it not been for them.
But in terms of, though, not like youth coaches, but semi-pro coaches, like in terms of maybe just 2 tiers down from EuroLeague, 2-3 tiers down, when you say they're already professional, and let's say most of the team is professional, but there's a certain amount of professionalism, understanding, fundamentals, the foundation is there. What knowledge, what key things can you still implement without overwhelming them?
It's not that different, Dennis. You know, there's a great biblical saying, there's nothing new under the sun. You know, can a guy pass, dribble, and shoot? Does a guy understand the importance of communicating on the floor? Does he value the defensive approach that you have to play winning basketball? Can guys play together and to enhance one another's performance in order to enhance the team? You know, there's really no secret there. It's nothing new, not for me anyway. Maybe there's smarter people out there and smarter coaches than me, but basketball and sport, to me, it's a simple game that we've made extremely complicated and advanced as we all, you know, grow in the profession. But it's not that difficult a thing, you know, on a basic level. And if a guy comes to me, whether it be from a junior program or not, and he can pass, dribble, and shoot, and he understands the fundamentals of defense, and if he is a good teammate and a character and a quality guy, I can make it work. You know, I don't need a whole lot more than that.
So the last part of this quarter is the good person part, the stay humble part that you have also written in behind you. Stay humble, be kind, work hard. The self-criticism part, that's to me very important. Because we talked about it a little bit of what questions do you ask yourself after the game before you address the team? you as a staff, when you get together before you go into the locker room to do the final speech, what are the key questions, topics that you look yourself in the mirror with, and you kind of you want to address yourself first?
That's a great question, and I'm gonna give you a very honest answer, and anyone that's worked with me will tell you. The first thing I always did after the game, we would go, first to the coach's room. The first thing I always asked, and it was the same question, it never changed. I looked at my guys and I said, did we deserve to win? That was always the question, whether we won or lost. The question was, did we deserve to win? In other words, did we do everything we could in our power to best prepare, to best practice, to best adjust, to best evaluate in the best possible way that gave us the opportunity to feel like we deserve to win this game? And, invariably, the answer was not always the same. There were times when we recognized that we didn't, even games that we won. And then it made it a lot easier for me to go into the locker room and tell my guys, hey, you didn't do this, or hey, we didn't do that, or collectively, we did a great job, or collectively we did a poor job. And by the way, and this is something that competitors are very, very, they have a difficult time accepting. You don't always deserve to win every game. You maybe didn't do everything right, or everything well, or everything in a fashion that gave you the right to feel like you should win the game, even if you won the game. That's why post-game evaluation is so important, and recognizing, did you live up to your principles? Did you live up to your plan? Did you do the things that gave you the best possible chance of being successful? After a game, when you've done everything in your power to do things right, and you don't win, you should never feel disappointed. That's the worst thing to feel. You can feel sad. It's natural. We all want to win. We all want to come out and people are cheering us and people are smiling and the management is happy, and you got the title or you got whatever it is that floats your boat. But you never want to feel disappointed, like I didn't do what I should do in the best possible way in order for this to bring about the result that we had hoped for. You can be sad. It's natural. It's normal. But never leave a game or a task or an endeavor feeling disappointed. That's on you.
All right, David, you ready for my ATOs? Would I finish off the podcast every time with quick hitter questions that I draw up from my?
Love ATOs, man.
Yep. All right. So just going to be quick questions I will throw out there, and you answer how you feel, whatever pops into your head first. One overrated aspect of coaching.
One overrated aspect of coaching, that you yourself can actually make a shot.
One underrated aspect of coaching.
That you can ask more of your guys as long as you're willing to give more.
Advice from your current self to your younger self.
Keep your ears open. Keep your eyes wide. Keep your motivation high. And always care about your people.
Biggest pet peeve as a coach.
Some guys that do the maximum of the minimum, some guys that do the minimum of the maximum, but very few that do the maximum of the maximum.
If you had to teach a class today other than about basketball, what would it be on?
Leadership.
What does home mean to you?
Home is two places that you love and two people that love you and you love them back.
What was the country you always wanted to coach in but never did?
Australia.
A player you wanted to coach but you never did?
Oh, there's a lot of those. and I coached a lot of great people and a lot of great players. I wish I could have coached Arvydas Sabonis.
Okay, I can't say anything about that one. That's my favorite one. I still look back at clips from 1983, 84. I mean, it's to me, he's the original unicorn to me.
If not his two very bad foot injuries, truly one of the great players of all time. By the way, we have a present day Sabonis playing, Nikola Jokic, who is the closest thing to Sabonis. But for me, Sabonis was and for always will be the greatest player I ever saw.
The athlete Arvydas was spectacular for his size.
People just don't know.
Yep. So last one, and it's a quote that we both you actually texted me. I want to leave you with that and leave the audience with that for you to comment and dig a little bit deeper into that. Einstein: everything that can be counted does not necessarily count. Everything that counts cannot necessarily be counted. Go.
Absolutely. In this world of statistics and analytics and media popularity, people tend to lose sight of what's really important and always try to value and evaluate based on some concrete evidence. But that's not what really does it, not for me. I know what makes teams and coaches and players successful. And it's got nothing to do with those things. Be the best person you can be and commit to excellence, and you're gonna do well.
David Blatt, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Do you agree that we should call this episode Cultural Competency?
Well, cultural competency is a lot of things, but that's certainly part of my life and a way of doing things, but I don't know if you can call it that. Maybe basketball is life and life is basketball.
That's it. All right, you got it. Thank you, David. It's been probably the richest episode that I've got to experience, so I appreciate it. I thank you very much, and I'm sure the audience does as well.
Well, thank you for that, man. I wish everybody the best.
Thank you, everybody.